Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 200. So we finally hit 200. Tonight's topic was Black cultural intelligence, African growth and opportunity as a policy. So this is part of the new series that we're following throughout the year about Black cultural intelligence and the fourth industrialization of this century. So without further ado, hit the like button as you come in. Share the video if possible. There's a doc in the description beneath the video if you want to follow along. And we're going to get started. Richard Dixon, Ronan Black, if y'all want to get on the panel, let me know. Should be a link in your email. All right, so first item on the docket is from Face to Face Africa. Face to Face Africa kicks off its 8th annual Pan African Weekend, July 18th to the 21st in New York City. Pan African media company Face to Face Africa will be hosting the 8th edition of its annual fest, the Pan African Weekend, from July 18th to the 21st. Held in New York City, the Pan African Weekend is a prestigious annual celebration of Pan African culture and achievement. It is the only national conference of its kind designed to highlight, empower, and celebrate the impact and contributions of foreign blacks and people of African descent in the United States to foster greater economic, social, and cultural relations within black communities. So make sure y'all get your tickets and reserve up, get your suit and ties. Make sure make sure your face game is looking tight, beard's all shaped up, got your fresh lineup. Make sure y'all get that LinkedIn tightened up too, so y'all can start connecting with people. So this is definitely going to be a dope event. I haven't been to one of these events before. I've been to other events, but I haven't been to this one in particular. So definitely something that people should be on the lookout for. Y'all make sure y'all hit the like button as y'all come in, please. Yeah, so if you're pro-black, make sure you attend that event, July 18th to the 21st, 2019, up in New York City. You definitely got to be there for that. All right, let me get to this next item on the docket, which is tonight's focus. All right, this one is from the U.S. United States Executive Office, Trade Representative. So, African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. So let me read this off. I won't go into too much detail. You can read it for yourself if you want. You're so interested in it. The African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, was signed into law by President Clinton in May 2000 with the objective of expanding U.S. trade and investment with sub-Saharan Africa to stimulate economic growth, to encourage economic integration, and to facilitate sub-Saharan Africa's integration into the global economy. The act establishes the annual U.S. Sub-Saharan African Economic Cooperation Forum, known as the AGOA Forum, to promote a high-level dialogue on trade and investment-related issues. At the center of AGOA are substantial trade preferences that, along with those under the Generalized System of Preferences (GSP), allow virtually all marketable goods produced in AGOA eligible countries to enter the U.S. market duty-free. Since its inception, AGOA has helped to increase U.S. two-way trade with sub-Saharan Africa. The U.S. Congress requires the President to determine annually whether sub-Saharan African countries are eligible for AGOA benefits based on progress in meeting certain criteria, including progress towards the establishment of a market-based economy, rule of law, economic policies to reduce poverty, protection of internationally recognized worker rights, and efforts to combat corruption. As of January 1st, 2019, 39 sub-Saharan African countries are eligible for AGOA benefits. The U.S. government provides assistance, most notably through 4 regional trade hubs, to African governments and businesses that are seeking to make the most of AGOA and to diversify their exports to the United States. AGOA, including GSP, imports for 2017 totaled $13.8 billion, up 68% compared to 2001, the first full year of AGOA trade. Petroleum products continue to account for the largest portion of AGOA imports, with a 69% share of overall AGOA imports. AGOA non-oil imports were $4.3 billion in 2017, more than triple the amount in 2001. Several non-oil sectors experienced increases during this period, including vehicles and parts, apparel, jewelry and parts, cocoa paste, cocoa powder, fruits, nuts, and footwear. South Africa was the largest non-oil AGOA beneficiary. Top AGOA suppliers were Nigeria, $6.1 billion, mainly crude oil. South Africa, $2.9 billion, mainly vehicles and parts, iron and steel, fruits and nuts. Angola, $2.3 billion, mainly crude oil. Chad, $590 million, mainly crude oil. In Kenya, $408 million, mainly apparel, macadamia nuts, cut flowers. Other leading AGOA beneficiaries include Lesotho Apparel, Monterius Apparel, Madagascar Apparel, Ethiopia Footwear, Cote d'Ivoire Cocoa Paste and Cocoa Powder, and Ghana Cocoa Paste, Powder, and Apparel. In 2017, leading AGOA import categories were crude oil, $9.5 billion, transportation equipment, $1.3 billion, textiles and apparel, $1 billion, minerals and metals, $826.6 million, agriculture products, $552 million, and chemicals and related products, $320 million. So things are popping this year, and probably last year, for the AGOA, which is the African Growth and Opportunity Act. So basically, the United States is establishing free trade zones between America and Africa, or countries within the sub-Saharan Africa that are qualified, and it's 39 as of this year that are actually qualified. So this is an opportunity for a lot of Pan-Africans who want to get involved in doing business across the Atlantic. This is the perfect opportunity to get in. Reigning Woman, what's going on? How are you doing? Ghana Warrior, what's going on? Yeah, Ronin Black, if you want to get on the panel, just let me know. All right, this next one is from the Council on Foreign Relations.org. AGOA, the U.S. Africa Trade Program. Introduction. The cornerstone of U.S. economic relations with sub-Saharan Africa since 2000 has been the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA. The program offers more than 36 participants preferential access to U.S. markets by eliminating import tariffs. Policymakers hope that AGOA, as a primary U.S. trade policy for the region, would foster economic and political development in Africa. However, the outsized role of oil and apparel in Africa export growth has raised questions about whether AGOA can diversify the region's economies and increase its competitiveness in global markets. Meanwhile, U.S. trade with AGOA's participants has dropped since its 2008 peak, almost to its pre-AGOA total, while African trade relationships with other countries, particularly China, have expanded. Keep in mind, this is a dated article. I'm just highlighting it because it's I think it's relevant. AGOA is a trade preference program established in 2000 as part of border legislation to strengthen U.S. trade ties with Africa and the Caribbean, enacted by President Bill Clinton. The act is unilateral, meaning that it does not require African countries to lower their barriers to U.S. goods, though it encourages them to do so. President Clinton saw the policy as a way to boost growth and bolster democratic ideals across the continent. He also said that it would strengthen the U.S. economy by opening markets with hundreds of millions of potential consumers to American producers. The act is an extension of a U.S. trade preference system introduced in 1974 that allows more than 100 countries, mostly in the developing world, to export many of the goods to the United States duty-free. AGOA goes even further, offering this access to more than 6,000 products from its 38 current participants. It also mandates the executive branch to increase U.S. development assistance to sub-Saharan Africa countries and areas including agriculture and HIV/AIDS prevention. It was set to expire in 2008, but has since been renewed 4 times. This was under Obama. Only sub-Saharan African countries are eligible to be beneficiaries of AGOA, and the legislation outlines requirements candidates must fulfill, such as upholding the rule of law and human rights and liberalizing their economies. However, U.S. presidents may disqualify countries at their discretion and have done so for reasons such as rights violations or protectionist policies. Participants graduate out of AGOA if per capita gross national income reaches $12,235, the World Bank's lower limit for higher income countries. Here's a map of those who export to the United States and those who are beneficiaries of it and those who are suspended. So Sudan, Somalia, DRC, and Zimbabwe have been suspended from this. I'm not entirely sure if this is an updated map because this is a bit of a dated article, so keep that in mind. So your top exported countries would be Nigeria, Chad, Angola, and South Africa. And the other beneficiary countries are those who are left over out of that: Mozambique and Madagascar and Ethiopia, Mali, Mauritania, Guinea, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, the Congo, Gabon and Cameroon, Central African Republic, etc. Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, Tanzania, Uganda. So AGOA received strong bipartisan support early on, with policymakers and trade officials pointing to a spike in U.S. imports of African goods as proof of its success. In the decade after the program began, exporters from AGOA countries to the United States nearly tripled, rising from $22 billion to $61 billion. In 2010, Rosa Whitaker, a former assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Africa, called AGOA a phenomenal success, saying it has had created more than 300,000 jobs on the continent. While the nonprofit African Coalition for Trade estimated in 2012 that up to 1.3 million jobs were created indirectly. Some analysts say the program has also helped several African countries diversify their economies. For example, South Africa ramped up its automotive exports to the United States from $151 million in 2000 to a high cost of $2.2 billion in 2013. Apparel production also spiked, particularly in East Africa. The most AGOA-related jobs were generated in this sector, according to Brookings Institute. However, some experts say U.S.-Africa trade relations remain underdeveloped. After an initial jump, for instance, exports have fallen below their 2000 level. Diversification has also lagged as oil continues to dominate exports from participants, consistently making up for at least two-thirds of AGOA trade since 2000. Three countries, Nigeria, South Africa, and Angola, contribute to the vast majority of the total exports. Enthusiasm for AGOA among U.S. policymakers has flagged in recent years, with some analysts pointing out that AGOA participants' exports have decreased in 2016, dropping below their level when the program started. There are also concerns about Africa's continued dependence on low-value added products and natural resources. Beneficiaries export few of the higher value manufactured products that the legislation hoped to spur. CFR's Michael Froman, the U.S. Trade Representative under President Barack Obama, suggested in 2014 that obstacles including corruption and poor infrastructure were hindering the competitiveness of African producers and limiting the program's success. Trade expert Kim Elliott argues that the United States has failed to provide sufficient financial assistance to help African economies upgrade their competitiveness. Other analysts say that the United States should push for more private sector investment to take advantage of the region's economic growth, which has higher than the global average over 15 years after AGOA was implemented. Some, like the Brookings Institution's Whitney Schneiderman and Moyombe Ngabluba, suggest a transition towards two-way trade policies. Since its inception, AGOA was widely viewed as a first step toward permanent free trade agreements, FTAs. However, Washington has not concluded any FTAs with sub-Saharan African countries. While it did hold negotiations with South Africa, they failed in 2006, primarily due to disagreements over intellectual property rights and foreign investment rules. So I covered all this because I think this is going to be a perfect opportunity, according to the original item on the docket that I covered from the Treasury, from the Trade Department of the U.S. government, that 39 countries have signed on. So a free trade zone is really huge for doing business. If we're talking about building up Black communities, this is going to be a part of your lexicon for doing business. It's impossible to have these discussions about building up a Black community without taking these policies into consideration. So policy matters in terms of doing business and building up communities. It would be impractical not to have that conversation. We covered a hangout before about opportunity zones under Trump. Some people say that enterprise zones were already developed back in the day. I haven't looked at the enterprise zones in parallel with opportunity zones to really speak on that. But what I'll focus on is just the opportunity zones. I think there's an opportunity here, without the pun intended, to create a Pan Africanist economic zone. So basically, how do we create policy that takes African Americans goods, exports them to the continent without any import duties, and how do you create um, vice versa? A lot of these companies go to India for outsourcing, but how do you establish the same IT sectors in on the continent and take that sector away from the Central Asia and Southeast Asia? How do you create platforms that are going to challenge those areas, their spheres of influence? So I think there's an opportunity to sit down and actually look over some of the documentation, look over some of the policies, and actually connect the two and create something that's going to spur some economic growth. All right, let me get to this next one. All right, this next one is from CEOmagazine.com. Investing in Africa: why the continent should be on your radar. As the as the Africa Rising narrative continues to build momentum, how can savvy investors find opportunities in this emerging region? This touches on something I had just said a few seconds ago. So, hey, what's going on, Money Mike? In just two decades after in just two decades, Africa's position on the global stage has undergone a serious transformation. Many African countries have grown at strong rates, with the continent boasting six of the world's 12 fastest growing economies. This diverse continent is home to countless companies that are on the cusp of becoming regional leaders and will soon play a central role in worldwide business ecosystem. In this environment, it's not difficult to see why foreign countries, especially China, are heavily investing in opportunities throughout Africa. The People's Republic is now Africa's largest trading partner and continues to pour money through aid and loans on favorable terms into the region. For example, from 2013 to 2017, the East African nation of Kenya saw its trade volume with China grow by 59% to total $5.2 billion. Western nations are falling behind China in the new scramble for Africa and risk becoming increasingly irrelevant to African companies and countries if they don't make meaningful efforts to engage the continent. So why has China overtaken the West in Africa? Western companies pursue high profits and are more aware of the risk in Africa. In comparison, Chinese firms can live with lower profit. They are more willing to take various kinds of security and business risks. This is something we can learn from. They're willing to, they're willing to take a loss if they have to. Different method of thinking from east eastern region of the hemisphere versus the western hemisphere. Additionally, Chinese have The Chinese have more experience in a developing market as they went through the process recently, says Professor Tang Jiangyang, Deputy Director and Resident Scholar, Carnegie Tingshao Center for Global Policy in Washington, D.C. Government policies across the Western world are increasingly focused on improving trade and cooperation between individual Western businesses and their African counterparts. The European Union announced in 2018 that it plans to provide 40 billion euros, 45 billion US dollars, in funding to African countries in its next budget, with the EU offering financial risk guarantees to boost investment from private investors. Some African countries have been negatively impacted by volatile commodity prices in recent years, but future economic forecasts speak for themselves. According to the United Nations predictions, the 10 fastest growing cities from 2018 to 2035 will be in Africa. I, I, I've been beating this drum since we started these hangouts that if you don't get into Africa right now, if you claim to be pro-black and be and a Pan-Africanist, and you don't get into Africa between now and 2035, I just mentioned this last week, you're an idiot. If rich Western countries can position themselves in African markets now, they will be able to establish vital distribution channels and connections to be better prepared for the continent's prosperous future. Local African companies only stand to benefit from partnering successfully with foreign firms. Doing so will give foreign companies a foothold in compelling African markets and allow them to quickly get up to speed with the unique regulatory and operating environments found in the African region. Every African nation requires a different approach and strategy, as local businesses conditions can differ dramatically. What's going on, Keep It Techie? It may be clear that it may be clear that there are exciting investment opportunities throughout Africa, but continuing challenges threaten the continent's prospects. From rising debt levels and high unemployment rates to historically weak institutions, potential investors should be aware of the particular risks they face when entering the region, especially as African markets remain highly fragmented. There continues to be relatively high barriers into intracontinental trade, which have worked to reduce efficiency and productivity growth, as well as prevent industries from graduating to higher levels of maturity. African economies still need to do more to ease intercontinental trade, explains Tony Igbo, uh, VP, Head of Investments in Itana, a Nigerian-based startup accelerator. Keep that in mind. We need startup accelerators as well. As Africa's economies continue to thrive, and it's the middle and upper classes in countries such as Nigeria and South Africa and Kenya that are growing. This, alongside increasing access to luxury brands, it's creating the perfect storm for the higher end retailers. According to market research provider Euromonitor, sales of luxury goods on the continent are set to grow by 5.6% this year to a total of $5.2 billion in 2019. Unstable Unstable commodity prices have reduced the spending power of some entry level luxury consumers, meaning the more affordable luxury goods may have a harder time in getting sold. But Africa still has the second fastest regional growth rate for these goods, behind only the Middle East. So, as African Americans, are showing high declines in unemployment rates and or fast increases in unemployment rates, Africa is actually growing rapidly at a at a parallel rate. So as African Americans go down, percentage-wise, Africans actually keep going up at the same rate. So you're seeing a direct parallel in declines and in inclines. Even a decade ago, the presence of brands like Burberry, Prada, and Gucci in Africa countries were extremely rare, while designer labels are not common in this continent as they are in London or New York. Newly minted millionaires are driving demand for higher status products. Africans are balling. They're starting to ball right now. A new middle class is being formed, and a upper income class is actually relatively new within the last couple of years. So they're creating their own sort of bougie class of people now. Investors need to consider the long-term potential of African markets, including the luxury sector, as the true potential of this growing continent will take a number of years to be fully realized. So let me read this last paragraph. From Nigeria's booming Nollywood film industry that produces over 1,500 movies every year to tech hubs driving innovation in Kenya's capital of Nairobi, African nations offer innumerable opportunities for shrewd investors. The common stereotypes that Africa only exports oil, gas, and diamonds is outdated, and while these goods are still in demand, a diverse manufacturing base is taking hold in many African countries. For example, coffee in Uganda, leading export product, accounting for a substantial proportion of the country's export sales. And thanks to the African Growth and Opportunity Act in the U.S., offering duty-free access to for sub-Saharan Africa countries to leading apparel markets, textiles, and clothing, exports have shot up in Lesotho, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. So one thing you could take away from this is that if you're in one of these select countries, you can actually benefit greatly from all of this. If you so set up the business to do so, I think that African Americans coming over there with their 401k or cashing out of their 401k now would be an actual good opportunity to get out, get out and invest that money into major industries in Africa. I'm not offering financial advice. I'm just saying that that's something that I would do. Money Mike says, what markets should we start investing in for the long term in Africa? I think technology is going to be a huge market. I also think that agriculture is a huge market as well. Africa has a lot of vast land, so there's a lot of areas that can be utilized um, for growing many forms of agriculture right now. The only problem is how do you get water to it, right? So irrigation. So if you can figure out the irrigation piece, you should be able to benefit from it. I think that you know those are the two areas that I look into. We've done hangouts on this in the past 6 months, so you can look through our hangouts and um, check out the agriculture and technology hangout that we did. What's going on, D? Let me get to the next article. All right, next article is from Forbes.com. The key to unlocking Africa's potential lies in its power supply. If if one had to name a single resource key to unlocking Africa's economic potential, including job creation, access to knowledge, agriculture, and industrial transformation, the power supply would have to be high up on that list. According to a 2016 study, approximately 43% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa, up to 600 million people, live without access to electricity. While most of that population lives in rural regions, city dwellers also face access challenges. In fact, electricity only reaches a third of the urban sub-Saharan population, and this lack of power is stifling economic growth as well as hindering improvements in health and education. Connecting connecting African cities, towns, and villages is the next step to enabling development of a large scale, supporting the power infrastructure that would create this environment. However, creates significant challenges with inadequate infrastructure, making the expansion of grid networks financially and logistically infeasible for many countries. When your roads are nothing more than dirt tracks, how do you supply, how do you build and supply what is needed for the power grid? Although national centralized grids may be too costly an option for some governments, projections see electrification across the entire continent rising at a rate of 70% by 2040, bringing electricity and power to 800 million or more people. Connection to a grid will change daily life for hundreds of millions of people. So, what technologies will achieve this level of electrification? For maximized impact, the future of power generation technology in Africa lies in a mix of traditional power plants, small scale kits for individual households in remote areas, and mini grids which operate at the village level. What's more, they'll all operate at different scales. Combining central plants and local grids will keep this demand going and help people across access the power they need. The majority of power generated in Africa still relies upon fossil fuels, along with hydroelectric power from the dams to scale up energy generation. As urbanization across the continent increases and industry outputs continue to grow, it is likely that residents will see greater access to on-grid power. But even where grid power exists, service can often be unreliable, and daily outages are the norm. In fact, about 5 out of 9 countries in Africa experience regular power shortages and blackouts, costing their economies on average 2% of their GDP, according to the African Progress Panel. In a recent report by the Center for Global Development, CGD, which studied energy demand in 12 African countries, found that among those with access to the grid electricity, at least half of the population suffer electricity outages at least once a day. When the central grid is unreliable, it means that off-grid power or off-grid and mini-grid solutions such as generator sets become the essential technologies enabling people to meet their basic needs. Even urbanized areas where grid networks are usually at their most developed, the mini and off-grid options are integral to everyday life. For example, in Nigeria, the CGD study showed that on-grid users in urban areas rely on generators more heavily than those with grid power in rural areas, 51% versus 43%. Off-grid solutions are on the rise, but with increasing demand for energy-intense appliances, especially televisions and refrigerators, the small size of off-grid products cannot serve every need. That means there is a there is an emerging role for many grids, which use mix of renewable resources such as solar, biomass, or onshore wind turbines, as well as diesel generators. Many grids are built at a village scale and require less capital investment. Importantly, though, they provide more power than off-grid systems, allowing rural areas to use machinery and equipment that enhance their own productivity. Compared to expansions of a national grid, mini grid options are a much faster and cheaper option. They can also bolster national grids without eliminating them, instead providing continuity of power during interruptions, resilience in a pinch, dependability for years. So I don't want to read too much of this. I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that these opportunities are here. Infrastructure is what this article is talking about. So I've talked about this before, that the infrastructure is your investment. So if you can come up with a solution to deliver power to a village or even um, a small enclave of people where there's a tribe or something like that, that's actually a big game changer in itself. Mr. DE, how are you doing, brother?
Pretty good, Mike. How are you?
I'm good. Can't complain. You have anything you want to add to this?
Not really. What you said is absolutely correct. It's instead of waiting for the national grid system to reach you, what a lot of guys should do if they want to invest, is like, and you brought up, I don't know if it's you or Linnell, you guys had you sure we're using like a blockchain. You can
Mm-hmm.
invest incrementally. Like me, I put in 1,000. You put in 1,000. Another guy put in 1,000. We build the infrastructure and start with a village. You might find a village with 10,000 people. You build electric grid, another village, and you build these micro grill, ah, grids. And then maybe, I don't know, 10 years down the road, then the main grid reaches your area and you're putting your power in, your excess power into that grid. So you're making money locally and nationally. So a lot of our people should be looking at that system, really. You know what I'm saying? And not only that, but when you got a village, that if you're gonna provide like the infrastructure, transportation is one of them. They need really bad like trucks and buses that can move products from the village to the city.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You take a shipping container, you put some batteries in there, you get some solar panels that can provide up to a gigawatt of power or a megawatt of power. Um, now you're playing a different game. Now you can resupply energy to different villages and so on and so forth over power lines, and you can provide fiber optic connectivity over those power lines, or copper connectivity at 100 megabits or 200 megabits, um, all a part of the same line of infrastructure. This is possible. This is highly possible. And all you have to do is drop those shipping containers in the places that it needs to be at, fold with batteries, connected to solar panels, connected to wind turbines, and let that sucker power up and connect them to the houses. So this is a part of the infrastructure development that we've been talking about. So you're right about that, D.
That's one of the things, and you don't need to be a millionaire. It's like you got a 401k. Say you just retired, you got a 401k. Now your 401k's got half a million, and you decide you know what? Let me invest 50,000. You find somebody else who got another 10,000, 50,000, whatever. You get a percentage, according to your investment, and we make up a contract. We decide on the area we're gonna go into, and we go do the job. Shouldn't be afraid, because one day alone you can lose that. It's not that 50,000 is not a lot of money. But if you lose 50,000 in the market here, you know, um, it's the same thing as investing it and waiting for the long term. You know what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying, Mike? If you invest in and you get your 50,000 back, say in 2 years down the road when the grid is built.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's a variety of ways that you can go about this. You can go through a barter system. You know, I'll allocate you, a kilowatt of power if you provide me with something of exchange. Can you offer me access to some farmland? Can you offer me access to cell phone towers? 5G towers and things like that. There's all types of ways that you can go about this.
Right. Yep, that's the. I mean, what you just said is something that this is already going on in the villages in Africa. You see people who are bartering, and if you got a guy who has got a cow and he want to buy you for power or something else, what you do is you collect all everything that you barter. You got your transportation, you got your trucks. You take them to the city and you sell them. And now the village is trading. You know what I'm saying? The whole village is trading, not one guy trying to trade.
Hmm.
So this thing is it goes further than that what the article that you read states. But they can't cover a whole lot because they're looking at it from a perspective as somebody from Europe coming in and building an infrastructure. Whereas I'm looking at from somebody on the ground in Africa because I've been there and I see the need and I know exactly and down to the micro. You know, when I say micro, I know where I can put a pole, where I can put a thing between two villages. That same that truck that container, put the container between two or three villages, supplying all with power. You know, that's the you gotta have that ability, and
You
that's
got
why I
to
say
have the wherewithal.
right,
Yeah, you got to have the wherewithal to think about it. So,
right. You gotta go there, and you gotta get somebody. You guys, there are a lot of the first thing is there are a lot of African Americans there. There are a lot of African Americans in Africa. There's some people there who don't talk about their living in Africa. They just there. They're just doing business and they're getting their business up and running and hoping that another African American will come along with the same information, with the same type of business ideas and kind of like push their plans back. You know what I'm saying? Because now you got two people fighting the same market. But
hmm
so these people are keeping their mouths shut and going about their business, which is the best way to do it. You know, let everybody think that things are not going well while you're doing good.
right, right, exactly. And when you think about it, your retirement, because you mentioned 401k, a lot of black people, need to start thinking about what am I gonna do if I'm 35, if I'm 30, 35 years old. I gotta start thinking about retirement at some point. Can I retire early? Can I save up to $100,000, $150,000 in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years, and retire early? Can I retire at 45, 46 years old, and move to the continent, take all my money with me, and finish off my last days over there, and live the best portion of my life between 45 and 65 years old over there, and live debt free. All right, let me get to this next article. I was actually looking at some rent prices over at over I think in Mozambique or Botswana. I think rent for like a two-bedroom apartment is like 450 or something like that, 450 American dollars. Can't beat that. All right, this next one is from AfricanNews.com. African Development Bank Business Opportunity Seminar invested in partnerships for Africa's transformation. The African Development Bank (AFDB) held a business opportunity seminar focused on strengthening and fostering the engagement of the business sector and of other stakeholders to effectively support investment in infrastructure and human development projects. We just talked about infrastructure. Seeking strategic alliances and potential business opportunities with what? Man, Richard Dixon, what's going on, brother? All that noise. Let me finish up this article. Seeking seeking strategic alliances and potential business opportunities with the bank, the participants, private sector representatives, civil works contractors, local manufacturers, suppliers, small and medium-sized enterprises, and government representatives took part in presentations and interactive sessions on the bank's visions for Africa's economic development, operational priorities, business processes, and procurement guidelines. Bank officials are at the two-day seminar held April 4th and 5th, 2019, at the institution's uh, Babacar Auditorium, also facilitated dialogue sessions on the ongoing projects and the bank's financial products, business opportunities, and programs available to the public, private, and social enterprises. Delivering the first presentation of the seminar on the bank strategies and policy parameters for partnerships and project financing, Hasantu Ms. Array, a senior policy specialist, said, "In special, in every investment we make, the bank's due diligence teams look at the economic viability and development impact of the project or program." Valerie Dabadi, the bank's manager for resource mobilization and partnerships, said the institution's capacity to link public sector needs with private sector enterprise expertise, technology, and resources was unrivaled on the continent. The African Development Bank Group has funded 4,391 projects since its inception. This includes 1,166 projects in West Africa with total commitments of $23.5 billion in 2018. The bank's total approvals and disbursements stood at 8 billion, 8.9 billion dollars and 6.2 or uh, $6 billion respectively. The body said so. They're moving a lot of um, funding around for a lot of projects that need to be that African countries and governments are looking to fulfill. So what happens with the African Development Bank is the African governments have projects that need to be fulfilled. They reach out to private sector locally on the ground who can fulfill those projects, and they allocate the resources for them, and project is done. That's the way business should work, and I think that's something that we should actually be looking into. More of a Pan-Africanist investment bank here in the United States. We should be looking at things like this. So there's a lot that can be learned from this article. Um, Mr. Paul Bryant, what's going on, brother?
Good evening. Guten Abend, Leute. How is everybody? Good evening, people. For those who don't speak German,
Mhm.
I don't know where.
Good, good.
I'm sorry.
I'm good,
Oh,
brother. Good.
good. Yeah. I don't know where you guys are so far in the chat, so I'm just trying to catch up a little bit. But I know you spoke. We
Hmm.
spoke. We spoke offline about a few things, so stayed
Hmm.
up to join in.
Hmm. I don't know how much you've heard from this article, but or any of the previous articles. But feel free to speak on anything that comes to your mind.
Um, I haven't really heard too much, but I really wanted to address something because I just got on about a minute ago. In the
Hmm.
chat, Black Cyber Network said that I'd say Africa shouldn't trade internationally. Isolationism was clearly good for 1 billion Chinese. Africa needs to experience a time of self development and totally devalue and cut off American money. So basically, that's not realistic. All right. China recognized that in order to bring itself into the modern day world, they had to move away from that policy of isolationism. All right. So there's absolutely no benefit to isolationism. All right. The What China has done is China has leveraged the intellectual capital not present in the country. All right. And if you really look closely and study, the first thing that China did was to tie itself economically at the hip with America. Okay. Now, only my personal opinion, but from what I'm seeing, China tied itself economically at the hip to basically act as a leech, if you will, for lack of a better term, to use the economic power and might of the United States to fund itself and fund its development and creation as a modern day first world nation with the long-term goal to move away from its economic dependence on America to become self-sufficient. So that's from an economic standpoint. As far as trade, there's absolutely zero problem with international trade. That is to your benefit. All right. So,
Hmm.
you know, um, so when a nation doesn't have, resources, resources come in all different forms, whether it be minerals, jewels, or intellectual capital. So speaking from to segue and transition to how this would directly relate to the continent of Africa. There are 54 sovereign nations on Africa, all right? And speaking from my personal experience, spending 22 months working and living there, all right? Um, Infrastructure is the key. That's what's needed in Africa. You cannot do or build anything physically, intellectually, economically, technologically wise without infrastructure, as has been highlighted numerous times over many months here on the Black Brain Trust. When it comes to AI and emerging tech, Africa is a good 10 to 15 years. I know you, Mike, would even say 20 years. That's your field of expertise. So I'll go with that. 20 years ahead of where Black Americans are with IT and emerging tech. But everything else, Africa needs infrastructure. So the investment there is infrastructure. So the best way to do that is to trade internationally, to deal internationally, to gain and leverage the intellectual capital that you do not have to build the infrastructure. As you're building your physical infrastructure, then you can go about to simultaneously build your economy, your financial infrastructure, your educational infrastructure, because these are things that are not there. Right there, once you once you travel to the major cities, as soon as you go 10 to 15 minutes outside of the major cities, yes, you literally are on dirt roads and dealing with huts and mud roads. Okay, that's not a derogatory statement, that's a matter of fact. Okay, the nature of the climate, the months on end of the extremely heavy rainy season, the flooding and drainage, huge problems there, lack of infrastructure, transportation. There are so many technologies that Africa could absolutely benefit for. Um, we spoke many. We spoke a few weeks ago how a lot of people feel that the African leaders and the powers that be, they're very corrupt, and they speak about the trade deals that benefit China. Of that, we're very clear on. What should happen and what needs to happen is that if you're going to bring foreigners in to leverage their intellectual capital, what you need to do is you need to have Africans working side by side with these people to learn and gain the skills that they're seeing in front of them. All right. Because as the old saying goes, if you give a man a fish, he's only going to eat for one night. However, if you teach that man how to fish, he can feed himself for the rest of his life. So, since you're starting behind the curve, behind the eight ball, if you will, China is a great model to follow, bringing in foreign outside investment, bringing foreigners in to build and construct. What China did, they were very smart. They used their own intellectual cap. They use their own labor force to learn from the manual blue collar level all the way up to the white collar intellectual level. Following that strategy, many of the sovereign nations on Africa could do much the very same thing.
Thank you for that, Paul. Richard Dixon, you have anything you want to add to this for what you've heard?
Hey, how y'all doing? It's
All right,
definitely
brother, you're gonna have to find another place or a phone booth or something. That's too much noise in the background for this hangout.
okay. I'm sorry. I'm gonna mute myself.
I thought he was at Magic City. Go ahead, D.
Good evening, brother Paul. How you doing, bro? Well, good morning.
Magic City.
Good morning, I should say. I'm forgetting you're
Yeah, yeah,
different time zone to me.
yeah. Good morning, bro.
Uh,
I specifically stayed up because a conversation Mike and I had offline. How are you doing, D?
Hmm.
in regards to what you were saying, I mean, I this brother in the chat, he's I don't know. Um, it takes he's I think the brother is just starting out. He's just coming into the chat, and he's kind of to me kind of confused. Um, he didn't do his homework. Otherwise, he will see that America, they built, I mean, highways connecting almost I think it's every city with 100,000 people. They connected, and
Hmm.
some of the highways now people are laughing at. They go to nowhere. Just go out in the boondocks and just stop. But that's what America did. Africa has to build infrastructure, as Paul said. The other thing is, with so many countries in Africa, you have a road that go from Botswana to the border of South Africa and stops. So Botswana can't trade with South Africa.
Hmm.
You can't isolate yourself, because technology must flow across borders. And China found that out, I would say, the hard way. From the time the U.S. came into China, brought with it the manufacturing of steel. You know, now they're doing cell phones. China is the leader in cell technology now. I mean, just look at what's happening with Huawei in the United States. So you can't isolate yourself. If you isolate yourself,
Hmm.
your economy is going to be left behind by the rest of the world. And that's if you look at what happened to America, you will see that America got to a point where it was the leader in technological development. And when they stopped putting out the developments that they had on the board that they already made, the country started falling behind,
Hmm.
and China started moving forward, leaving the U.S. behind. So you can't isolate yourself. The other thing is that when you isolate yourself, knowledge, because you got to teach your people, you got to teach your children, and your children have to, just like how our children picked up cell phone technology, computer technology, for better or for worse. The children in Africa have to pick up this technology if they are going to be the leaders of the coming revolution. Not this revolution that we're in right now, but the one that's coming. And you can't put yourself in a position where you're a follower. That's where Africa is now. Africa is following the rest of the world. And that's because they have been isolated. The French isolated their part of Africa. The Germans isolated their part of Africa. The British isolated their part of Africa. And so they kept the whole continent, what they call the dark continent. I don't remember. I know some of you guys remember Tarzan.
Yes.
So this idea of isolationism, forget about it. If you were one of those people who's going to follow that idea, don't even bother to go to Africa. And if I was you, I'd get some books on America. Study American history. You didn't study American history. It is obvious from looking at your statements in the chat. You didn't study American history.
If I can say
Forget.
this, I understand, and I know Mike definitely want to move on to the next article.
Mhm.
Just I understand the mindset that all we need is us and we need this and Africa needs that. I understand that, but um, one of the hardest things that I have trying to explain to many Black people here in America is that it is an emotional response to think that way. That is emotional based thinking. All right. Isolationism does not work. And that is one of the largest problems rampant in Africa. So maybe we should
One of the problems
probably
with North Korea.
table this to open mic section because I really think that that's something that we can and should go further in depth in, and maybe Mike just wants to move on with the next article for the sake of expediency.
Yes, absolutely. And to your point, look at what isolationism is doing to North Korea.
Bingo.
Uh, all right, this next one is from allafrica.com. Africa, how the Build Act can invigorate U.S. economic ties. Since the U.S. Build Act was signed into law last October, many people across Africa, as well as members of the Africa diaspora, have been asking what this global initiative might do to help revitalize American engagement with the continent. The answer is quite a lot. The goal of BUILD, or the Better Utilization of Investments Leading to Development Act, is exactly what the African private sector has long sought. BUILD does a number of positive things to boost the U.S. Africa economic business and development relationship. It checks China's growing economic influence in Africa, creates more robust and flexible investment tools for U.S. companies to use, and BUILD expands how America development funding will promote Africa's job creation, support entrepreneurship, and help grow Africa's small and medium-sized businesses. The BUILD Act establishes the United States International Development Finance Corporation (USDFC) and replaces and adds new business tools, including doubling the lending authority of the soon-to-be transformed U.S. Overseas Private Investment Corporation (OPIC). The USDFC will focus on facilitating private sector capital and skills development of low and lower and middle income nations. The economic level at which many African nations fall. The new USDFC will assist in helping African countries transitioning from non-market to market economies. Even more important today, as the continent's 55 nations recently formed the Continental Free Trade Area (CFTA), creating 2.4 trillion dollar market. The CFTA, if realized, would further open up opportunities for U.S. goods, services, and African private sector. Make no mistake, BUILD is about aligning U.S. development assistance with U.S. foreign policy objectives. But BUILD's upside for African nations is that the USDSC will help them achieve their objectives too, such as modernizing their economies and increase job opportunities and skills training for their citizens, particularly for women and small businesses. In its support for and it supports a Connect Africa initiative focused on information technology, transportation, infrastructure, logistics, and value chain development, especially for Africa's all important agricultural and energy sectors. The other good news is that the Build Act is bipartisan legislation in keeping with what has been a tradition. Since the late 1990s, congressional Republicans and Democrats have worked together on Africa issues to pass key laws. This includes the African Growth and Opportunity Act, landmark legislation that has drawn investment to Africa and improve the economic well-being of innumerable Africans. Bipartisan support means that build will be durable and suggests its possible expansion in the future. Build and the new USDFC are powerful instruments that should create opportunities in Africa or in African countries eager for jobs and capital to spur economic growth or economic development. U.S. businesses active in the region will be able to expand using additional financing tools. More importantly, Build will modernize America's antiquated development finance capabilities so they can address the challenges of the 21st century, increase U.S. exports and jobs. Build is a needed response to China's rapidly expanding economic presence in Africa. Today, Chinese companies are the dominant foreign investor in many African countries. Unfortunately, the practices of many of these companies are harmful. Labor standards are low quality, can be shoddy, and corruption often underlies Chinese deals. So, more policies on the table, more opportunities for us, as I see it. I don't see anything too wrong with this. Based on what we're just reading, I still think that there should be a deeper conversation amongst Black people on the ground here before they start, you know, dumping their money into areas that they don't even have an understanding of how things work, as we've seen in the chat right now. So, DE, you have anything you add to this?
Yeah, I've seen this. I've seen this program here built is like a combination of all the programs that the U.S. already have on Africa, from what I from what I remember reading. Um, it's really Obama set it up for American companies to go into Africa and kind of build. Uh, it was like a guarantee. If I go into say Nigeria and build a power plant, that if I incur losses, that the government, the U.S. government, is going to back me up. But what it doesn't allow you to just go in and waste money. But the problem is that somebody saw this idea that the Chinese are going in. So if we start to do these things, it will slow the Chinese progress. And that's what the program turned into. Now, today, it's turned into a program where I think it's run by AfricaCom now. And when I say run by AfricaCom, there's civilians, but AfricaCom is the ambassadors are the ones handling the who will go in and who will do what in Africa strategically, and try to outmaneuver the Chinese. But the Chinese already have a footprint almost throughout the whole continent. So except for really starting wars and conflicts, they really can't do anything. But it's a good idea if they will allow, if they allow the companies. Suppose I started a company and I wanted to go into Africa. Um, my company has to go for the long term. You can't be going for the next quarter profits, and that's what American companies like to do. You know, they want to go in there and buy the Nigerian power plant instead of building a power plant. And when they buy the Nigerian power plant, they're going to operate the same way the Nigerians are operating, which is blackout, brownouts, whatever, and increase the amount of money that the people are paying for power.
Mhm.
So that's not a really good idea, but that's what American companies are known for doing.
Right. They try to colonize a country by picking apart its public sector and turning it into private, which is what they did with Russia in the '90s, which is what brought Putin to power. And it never seems to work long term. This is what's going on in Greece and in many countries in Europe, where a lot of those failing countries from the pigs, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, um, are being picked apart for the infrastructure and public service sector. Now things that was traditionally publicly controlled by state has now been picked apart by foreign actors looking to basically bankrupt the country and control it and control its major sectors. Right now, I don't even think Greece controls their streets anymore. I think a lot of those streets have been auctioned off on the block.
You know, Mike, exactly. You know, this is the classic American playbook, which they got from the British: weaken and destabilize. So from the outset, one would say, well, how does that benefit? How does that make any sense? It makes total sense because if you weaken and destabilize, any country that is weak and destabilized can never threaten you, excuse me, can never threaten you militarily, politically, financially, culturally, socially, economically. So that was the British playbook for hundreds of years. It has been the American playbook for about 150 years, especially after World War II. So um, one thing, that what the Chinese are doing in Africa, there's nothing unique or special about it. They just identified a need and they went in there and they are capitalizing. So, um,
Mhm.
for those who, excuse me, for those who are of the right mindset and the right perspective, and I have to give credit where credit is due, because from my time on the ground, my mindset was the hurdles are way too massive. But it was you, Mike, who told me, no, the investment is in the infrastructure. And I said, you know what? You're right. You're absolutely right. You have to start somewhere. There are 1,000 places to start because it's an absolute mess. It's much worse than what people think it is. There are bright spots, but they're few and far in between. But the infrastructure is the investment. If you invest in the infrastructure, everything else, that is the foundation upon which you can build everything. And for good or for better or for worse, in my mind, it's a resource grab, but that's what the Chinese are doing, built starting with the infrastructure.
Mhm. Absolutely. All right, let me get to this next article from Brookings.edu. Figures of the week update on U.S. Africa trade and the implementation of AGOA. This is from last year, so I just want to touch on this briefly. Last week, the Office of the United States Trade Representative released the 2018 biennial biannual report on the implementation of the African Growth and Opportunity Act (AGOA). The report represents data on trade investment between United States and Sub-Saharan Africa, along with the review of AGOA eligibility for each country in the region. U.S. U.S. imports from Sub-Saharan Africa are recovering from the low in 2015, rising from $18.8 billion to $24.9 billion in 2017. The report primarily attributes this increase in the value of trade to rising commodity prices. Oil accounted for almost half of the U.S. imports from Sub-Saharan Africa, $11.2 billion of the $24.9 billion. Non-oil related imports falling under AGOA increased only marginally from $4.1 billion to $4.3 billion. Beyond oil, precious metals, cocoa, and vehicles were the most imported products from Sub-Saharan Africa. U.S. exports to Sub-Saharan Africa stood at $14.1 billion in 2017, lower than the $18 billion in 2015, partly due to the lower aircraft sales. From the U.S. perspective, its largest export market was South Africa at $5 billion, and its largest source of imports was Nigeria at $6.1 billion. So this African Growth and Opportunity Act policy has been pretty effective and, for the most part, something that we should be paying attention to.
Correct. I would agree 1,000%. The opportunities are there, right, for those who have, excuse me, for those who have the ability to do business. Okay, if you have business, are you able, as an individual or as a collective of individuals, are you able to go over there and take advantage? Okay, people people make mention of they want to build. Okay, fine. What do you want to build? Where do you want to build? Where are you going to build it? All right. How are you going to source your materials? You're going to need your building materials. You're going to need steel, concrete, glass. What are the logistics of getting your materials there? Do you have all of these things worked out? Do you have the resources to deal with people on the ground? Things that we've covered many times. Okay, a lot of people have a lot of ideas, but until you have been on the ground, you begin to realize all is not as it seems. So when you have business opportunities that you can avail yourself of, do you have the capital and the ability to make use of those opportunities?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Paul. But what happened is U.S. companies. Well, you know this already. U.S. companies tend to go into markets that are mature, and the markets that they're talking about here are mature market. Cocoa and oil. Deal with South Africa. South Africa is the mature um, market in Africa, because there's been the way South Africa has been dealing with the rest of the world compared to how Africa in general has been dealing with the rest of the world is different. Um, the other one is probably Egypt, Morocco, Libya. Those are markets that are kind of mature, but American companies tend to shy away from market that they got to create, and I don't know why they did do that. But look at what the Chinese are doing. The Chinese are creating markets in Africa. They're coming in and say, look, we want to build this. We're gonna because I've listened to some Chinese people who talk about what they do and how they began, and some of them didn't have never been to Africa, have no idea what they're going to do. They'll go there, the government back them up, and they say, well, you know what, go there, build a factory. Once you doing a good job producing, if you go there and slack off, we're not going to give you our money. But if you do a good job producing, then we're gonna help you out. And that's what they did. American producers don't do that. It's like American producers can build a car in Africa. I'm serious.
Hmm.
Every one of them can build a car in Africa. Why haven't they built a car company in Africa? They have the technology.
I thought I thought Ghana had their own car company out there.
Yeah, but they yes, Ghana has a car company, but the current um that company now, instead of building from the ground up, it has a lot of the parts are made in China. It's now
Yeah.
almost like a rebadged Chinese car.
Yes, that makes sense because I've heard Iran has something similar, and they've actually brought a lot of those processes and technologies to Venezuela, so Venezuela can produce the same exact vehicle under a Venezuelan brand. So it does seem like they're not manufacturing their own parts, and I would argue this is probably the best route that they can actually go with the little bit of capital investment that they can put into it.
Oh,
So I don't
Exactly.
knock them. Or
Exactly. I mean,
which
similar to similar to what Lada does, the Russian company that sells
yep.
that sells cars down throughout the Caribbean.
Hmm.
yeah. Until you can create your own car, until you can say, okay, let's like Toyota did. You understand? But until Toyota was able to build its own car, it started building small car. But after the war, after the war, that's what they did. They were remanufacturing. It's like what happened to the Philippines. I don't know if you guys know about the Jeepney, but the Jeepney is essentially the old Jeep that the Filipinos just took, extended the cab, and now they manufacture Jeepneys. They don't take old Jeeps and turn them into something. These guys build a vehicle from the ground up. So that's what Africa has to do now. It takes Chinese parts and start building a car. Later on down the road, they'll come up with a brand, their own brand, made from their own off the board drawings, technical drawings, engineering, and all of that.
Hmm.
Right, and to DE, I agree totally with what you said, but um, in order to facilitate that and to move that along, Africans need to work side by side with people who are going to be in country doing that. All right. So if it's if you're talking what you just said to build a car plant, then the whoever is the lead foreman on the construction site, there needs to be an African alongside of him learning the ins and outs and how to do that job so he can pass those skills along. The structural engineers, you need to have Africans alongside them learning those skills to pass them on. The R&D engineers for the actual automotive tech or automotive technology, right? So every specific need, there has to be an African working side by side with an outside person who already has this intellectual capital to learn it and then pass these skills on. All right, because these skills are not present in Africa. And I don't know why a lot of people just refuse to understand that or accept that. They're not, and they're not present in Africa, or they're present in extremely small numbers. So it needs to be spread out. Okay, so a lot of things are this could happen and this needs to be done, and that sounds that sounds great, but that comes back to the very basic thing about infrastructure. The ability to simply spread these skills and this knowledge is literally lacking or just not even there. So you have to start somewhere. You literally have to start from the ground up.
Hmm. All right, let me get to this next article. This one is from TechCrunch.com. Shipper Cash convinces Joe Montana to invest in African fintech. Joe Montana, not to be confused with French Montana. The African no-fee cross-border payment startup Chipper Cash has raised a $2.4 million seed round led by Decent Capital. The payments company also persuaded 500 startups and Liquid 2 Ventures co-founder by Joe Montana to join the round. Chipper Cash's Ugandan chief executive, Ham uh, Sa- uh, Saranjoji, pitched the U.S. football legend directly. He was excited about what we're doing and his belief that the next wave of tech growth will come from Africa. Saranjoji told TechCrunch. Chipper Cash went live in October 2018, joining a growing field of fintech startups aiming to scale digital finance applications across Africa's billion plus population. The venture, Saronjoji, co-founded with Ghanaian um, Majid, offers no fee P2P cross border mobile money payments in Africa. Based in San Francisco with offices in Ghana and Nairobi, Chipper Cash has processed 250,000 transactions for more than 70,000 active users, according to Saran Joji. This is really good.
Hey, Mike,
It
quick,
can, it,
quick question. I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
let me just finish this real quick.
Yes,
In
sir.
conjunction with the seed round, Chipper Cash is launching Chipper Checkout, a merchant-focused C2B mobile payments product. The side of this side of the startup's offering isn't free, and Chipper Cash will use revenues from Chipper Checkout in addition to income generated from payment volume flow to support its no-fee mobile business system. Sheil Monod, who led 500 startups investment in Chipper Cash, likened the company's model to PayPal. When PayPal started, it was just a consumer to consumer free app. It still is free to consumer, but they monetize the merchant side. That model is tried and tested. It just doesn't exist in Africa. So Chipper has the opportunity to do that, he told TechCrunch. In addition to Kenya's M-Pesa, the global success story for digital payments, there are a number of mobile money products in Africa, from MTN's mobile money in Ghana to Tiga Pesa in Tanzania. The limiting factor, though, according to Chipper Cash's CEO, is interoperability, or that mobile money transfers across the product platforms. Currency and borders generally don't work. Our tech settles cross border currency transactions in real time, and that's part of the value proposition of the platform, he said. The startup will expand beyond its current operations in Ghana, Kenya, and Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda within the next 12 months. Chipper Cash also plans to tap the global remittances market for sub-Saharan Africa, a large pool of roughly $38 billion in the near future. Remittances won't be the firm's top focus. However, Saron Joji's believes there's more volume to be found within Africa. Demographics, migration, and regional economic integration within the continent means there will be an indefinitely growing amount of cross-border commercial activity within Africa, he said. When it comes to payments, the pie is growing, and percentage of that pie is digital payments will also grow. This is just a snapshot of the fintechs in Africa right now. I mean, it's just a massive amount of digital infrastructure that's coming out of the fintechs. So banks, a fintech for those you are listening is basically a digital bank, and these are the brothers right here. It's always good to see black men in a winning position. Let me skip down here for a second. Startups building financial technologies for Africa's 1.2 billion population are gaining greater attention of investors. As a sector, fintech or financial inclusion attracted 50% of the estimated $1.1 billion funding to African startups in 2018. By a number of estimates, the continent's 1.2 billion people represent the largest share of the world's unbanked and underbanked population. An improving smartphone and mobile connectivity profiles for Africa, CGSMA, turns this scenario into an opportunity for mobile-based financial products. As more startups enter African fintech, Shipper Cash believes it can compete on its cross currency and no fee offering and the growing size of the market. Anyways, any of you gentlemen have anything you want to add to this? Because I'm going to download this app now.
Um, Quick question, Mike. Isn't this similar to what can be accomplished with what you keep telling you keep talking about via blockchain?
Yes and no. Blockchain is just it's digital ledger. So it's basically it's a piece of infrastructure, but it doesn't operate independently on its own.
Okay, all right.
Mhm.
I guess I guess my only other takeaway is that it's very good. It's very good to see young Africans doing this. So
Yeah, a lot of people think that I'm exaggerating when I say that black, the Africans are light, at least 20 years ahead. And I'm being generous when I say this because every article we read and the map, the image, the snapshot we just looked at of what's going on the continent alone, I don't see a whole lot of black people. If we're using the manosphere as a barometer, I don't see a whole lot of ideas coming out the kitchen like that.
right. Exactly. So when it comes to the AI, and emerging technologies, these Africans are absolutely ahead of where Black Americans are, 100%. You know, but the infrastructure is absolutely not there to really leverage this. That is where I see a huge, massive disconnect. So
Mhm.
if the investment in infrastructure can be made and the education infrastructure to really to really basically spread this intellectual capital further across the nation states, that would go a long way.
Do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, not right now. That's a real good idea what they did. It sounds like a step in the right direction. I mean, the more of Africa you can cover, the better. They mentioned PayPal, and that's actually a pretty good a good reference because these guys look like they're doing a pretty good job.
Hmm. I just put the link in the chat for the app, so if you guys want it, it should be there. It's available for iOS and Android phones. However, it's not catering to the U.S. as of yet. Still early in the process. So, but it does cover Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda as of right now. We should see some more by the end of summer. Probably will get U.S. support by the end of the year.
Yeah, that's this to me it's big. I know relatively speaking they are small, it's tiny now, but this app, what they're doing to me, in my mind, it's big. I see tremendous upside potential.
It's going to pay for itself. When you think about the amount of man hours that are put into the coding and how many sleepless nights they may have had, and how much money they're probably earning from this right now. it's going to pay for itself in a couple of years. So an app like this probably could cost them anywhere between 25 to 100 grand. Just from a labor perspective alone, labor and you know, living expenses. So that's probably what it costs them going in because they have to get this right. It can't be it can't be a beta app, right? Because if the app it doesn't work, then it's not really useful to the customer or the consumer itself. So they probably spent a whole lot of time doing a lot of testing and stuff like that, which is good. But the app looks really good. At least on my phone, it looks pretty good. So the way how I see it is that this is a part of the infrastructure being the investment. This is digital infrastructure that we're talking about now. So now you're talking about banking without actually having a brick and mortar. This is huge on that scale. I know there's some black people in the tech sector here in the United States, which you would consider to be ADOS. I know there's some people, we covered articles about those people too, but nothing on this massive scale is being done by members of ADOS at all. Not to my knowledge. And I'm in the tech sector. I'm in the deep part of the tech sector, and I don't see too many African Americans actually pushing the envelope the way the Africans are doing it.
Well, Mike, listen, as I say all the time, I'm all about the bottom line. Nothing else to me matters. Show me the money, put the money on the table. All right. So,
Hmm.
hashtags and, uh, uh, hashtags and narratives, emotional mindsets, directions, that all sounds great. But what what can you do on a physical, substantial level? Okay. Nothing else matters. At the end of the day, and here's something else a lot of black people refuse to hear. At the end of the day, the only money that really counts is the color of your money. But that's a that's another discussion for another day.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm not trying to slander or bash uh, African Americans. I'm just making a point
No, no, no,
that
at
if
all.
you're using no, no, I'm not saying to you. I'm saying to people in the chat. If you use the manosphere as a barometer for what are black people really doing, I can't honestly put them in the same category as Africans. I'm sorry. I see hangouts with people debating about who really built the pyramids. Um, you know, you know, are people simping in the pro-black sector in the conscious community? Are they simping for women? Where's the real discussion like this that's being had? Um, I don't see it. So if we're using the ministry as a barometer to what the scale of what black people are doing, I can't say that they're in the same league as Africans. That's all I'm saying.
Right, correct. You have to actually put money on the table. All right, and arguing back and forth about meaningless nonsense, we'll never put money on the table. Arguing, arguing narratives, again, not slander anyone, just to keep the focus on emerging technologies. Emerging technologies are the future. That's the future. Emerging technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Aisha Curry, um, is a testament to to our technical apparatus and our you know our technocratic positions in society. Our priorities are kind of mixed up. So,
Well, you know,
uh,
that's your 7 to 10 day current media news cycle. Every 7 to 10 days, a new news story comes out. Vigorous debate is encouraged within a very limited bandwidth for 7 to 10 days until the next new news story comes out. It's forgotten, and then the next one comes out. And at the end of the day, nothing gets accomplished. Nothing of any substance.
all right, this last one is from NBCNews.com. China's relation with Africa is illustrated by garlic tensions. Farmers say Beijing's growing presence in Kenya is having a negative impact on their lives, culture, and ability to make ends meet. In Baringo, Kenya, on a sticky morning on the slopes of Mount Kenya, Solomon Wambago Muniya sprinkles water on the long and sturdy green shoots of the garlic crop he planted in January. His farm is just 1/8 of an acre, perched on the humid mountainside in the fertile East African Rift Valley, over which glacier cap peaks loom. It isn't it isn't an easy existence, and his concerns conclude issues ranging from transportation costs to the low prices paid for produce. But these complaints are dwarfed by a new challenge farmers such as um, Munya feels powerless to fight. Imports of Chinese garlic flooded into the Kenyan market. Munya 38 and other local farmers say they are being undercut by producers who ship garlic almost 7,000 miles by sea from the world's most populous country. They accuse Beijing of garlic dumping and say they can't compete. If you go to the markets, you will see that 80% of the garlic is from China, says James Camus, who runs a support group for fellow farmers. Munya and Camus 40 are among those who say that China's growing presence in Kenya is having a negative impact on their lives, culture, and ability to make ends meet. But garlic is only a microcosm of the impact Chinese influence and investment are having across Africa. The agriculture sector employs 40% of Kenya's 49 million people and accounts for 26% of its economy. In recent years, China has offered African countries loans, development aid, and vast infrastructure projects as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, a $1.4 trillion network of modern trading routes. Kenya now owns 72% of its bilateral debt, or around $5.3 billion to China. That's around 1/5 of Kenya's total external debt. With China holding the purse strings, it has up it has the upper hand in any battle of wills. And garlic is just the latest foodstuff to be at the center of tensions here. In October, Beijing's ambassador to Kenya threatened a trade war after Chinese fish imports were halted amid claims the market was being flooded. China also threatened to pull funding for the second phase of the railway line connecting Nairobi with the major Indian Ocean part of Mombasa. China financed and built the initial stage of the project at an estimated cost of $3.2 billion, making it Kenya's most expensive infrastructure project since independence from Britain in 1963. Around 3 months later, Kenya relented and scrapped the import ban on Chinese fish. It cited uh, it cited market forces. That's one of the garlic farmers. Muya planted his garlic shoots in January with the help of two workers he hires for the day at a cost of $3 each. There's simple water supply and rich volcanic soil here on what Muya calls virgin land. His plot typically yields up to 600 pounds of garlic per season, earning him as much as $400, enough to send his son and daughter to school. But he struggles to comprehend why many Kenyan consumers are opting for the rounder, smoother, white Chinese garlic bulbs over locally grown produce. While Chinese garlic features larger cloves that are easier to peel by hand than the more intricate Kenyan variety, Munya believes his country crop boasts a key advantage: its taste. That's a long way. This is just a snapshot of the trade route that is the garlic is coming by on. I don't want to read this whole article because it just makes me mad just thinking about it. Um, but how I see it is playing out is that that's a very pretty picture. You're going to have a Boston Tea Party sort of event happen in Africa where they start dumping Chinese goods into the ocean and just start burning down all of their imports. And so China gets the message that we're not here to play, or that Africans are not here to play games anymore with you. That's exactly what's going to happen. And either China's going to punish them, or they'll just go to war over it.
You know, I look at that route and I see a modern day Silk Road. I see a modern day white highway. The white highway being heroin for those who are unfamiliar. But this goes back to what I said, about 15, 20 minutes ago. China is in Africa. It's a resource grab. Historically speaking, nations do not help each other unless there is for their self benefit or if there's mutual benefit. All right. So without going too deep down that rabbit hole, this speaks to exactly what I just said off the top of my head. Why? Because you have such rich soil there. So now farmers, Chinese farmers, are looking to grow their products, taking advantage of the resource wealth. Right? Understand that is why China is there. Anyone who is unclear about that, they're just not paying attention. So with all of that said, you know, isolationism is not the answer. It sounds good. It feels good. Being militant sounds good. That rarely ever works out. Since you have a developed nation, a first world developed nation in your borders, right? Leverage their intellectual capital to create your own intellectual capital. All right. I'm reminded of something that Thabo and Becky said years ago. He was sitting around at the table with other leaders of African nation states, and he said, "You cannot understand how emasculating it was as a man and as a leader of a sovereign state to go before NATO and the EU with my hat in hand and beg because I cannot feed my own people. I can utilize my own resources. They're in the ground and I'm watching foreigners take them because I don't have the intellectual resources to capitalize and use them. All right. So what does that lead to? That leads to unfair trade deals. All right. And a lot of people do not understand where that comes from. Having resources in the ground gives you mineral wealth. If you do not have the ability, the intellectual capital, or the mechanical infrastructure to utilize it yourself, it's meaningless to you. And therein lies the genesis of the unfair trade deals between China and the African nation states. This article, it doesn't make me mad. It doesn't piss me off because I'm past that. I'm beyond that. I don't like it. I'm unhappy because it speaks to what I keep saying. There needs to be Africans working alongside to learn. Then they can pass those skills on to other Africans. Then they can say, we can do it ourselves now. We no longer need you. Now we start to build our own infrastructure and do it ourselves. Then you will see fair trade imbalances.
And Mike,
Again, you know what? Go ahead, D. I'm sorry.
give me, I don't know, get, let's form a
Give
corporation.
you death to give you liberty.
Yep. Let's form a corporation. Let's
Do you want my tired and downtrodden?
put together. Seriously, look, I understand how you feel, Mike, about that garlic thing. The other day I was reading about Tanzania importing uh, poultry from Uganda because they don't produce enough. So I went through looking at, suppose I wanted to produce poultry and eggs, poultry product in Tanzania. I found, I think it is about 1,000 hectares of land for about $50,000.
Mhm.
But me, I really can't. I'm 66 years old. I don't want to put in 28 hours a week doing poultry farming. But there is the solution. I got the money, but you know, the other thing about Kenya and the fish, I can put in a fish processing plant. But as you say, all these people who sit here talking about what Africa is doing and how it's isolated and all that kind of foolishness, they got degrees and they're not putting it to work. You know,
Mhm.
they got degrees. They can probably secure the finance to build a company in Africa. $50,000, he probably spends a year. If he's got a degree and his income is 50,000, he spends that 1 year on a car. Buys a BMW or a Mercedes, but won't invest it. It's, we can fix the problems. You can do that with garlic in Africa. You got 1,000 acres of garlic. The Chinese don't have a market anymore, or you got half the market.
Or you take their garlic and you dump it in the ocean. That's what in the Indian
That's,
Ocean or the Red
that's the
Sea.
alternative.
That's what you,
The year that you plant garlic and the year that your garlic harvest comes out, there's no Chinese
mhm.
garlic to buy in Africa. So you guess what? You got the market for yourself.
Yeah, the sharks will love it though.
You see? I agree with you. Sometimes you gotta take drastic action.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
What's
wanted
going on,
to.
Complex Son?
Well, hey, good evening, gentlemen. Good evening, everyone in the chat. Um,
Hmm.
Very interesting uh, comment here. I just wanted to read it. Y'all sound like you want China and Russia to build your neighborhoods. Then you'll suddenly wake up one day and own the whole thing. We have to detach the leeches. We have not paid enough money. See, um, well, okay. Let's just kind of let's pick that apart a little bit. All right, because they already have a presence there. Um, you have to you have to essentially learn. You have to learn from what it is that they're actually bringing to the table, what they're bringing to you in terms of technology, in terms of infrastructure, manufacturing plants and facilities, and mills and mining. See all the technology. See that wasn't there. They brought it there. So now someone's got to learn it. Now, if no one wants to learn it and then improve upon the technology, springboard that knowledge into, say, new methods of resource extraction, new methods. So I'm saying you can look at something from a tinkering standpoint. I'm a tinkerer, so I look at things and I look at how to modify them. You know, how to make them more efficient, how to make it faster, how to do different things. And what I'm saying is that if you had nothing there, and then all of a sudden, you brought all of this technology. I don't know. I would think that you would learn the stuff. So what Paul said, you learn side by side. You learn what this is all about, and then because you have a more intricate knowledge, a more in-depth knowledge of the terrain, the environment, culture, and all these other things, you can take that sort of cultural, intellectual capital, if you will, because you own it. They just came to do business with you. They don't know you like you know you. They don't know that. They don't know that. So the bottom line is that you learn what you need to learn from them, and then you improve upon it. I don't really see the I don't see how you lose out if you learn something about I don't even see I don't see how you lose out if you obtain knowledge in the process. Let's just say that.
Ulysses,
Yes, sir.
good evening. How are you? Well, evening for
I'm good, sir. How
you,
are you?
early morning for me. I'm good. I'm tired. Um, I'm not a person who likes to really talk and about myself in particulars. I went to college for business, finance, and economics. Started with advanced placement in high school. I went to work for one of the largest investment investment banking firms in the world. It doesn't matter what it was because I'm not there. I worked on Wall Street for 10 years. My area of expertise was international arbitrage. Okay, I traveled to 5 different continents doing business. Left and went into a different field of employment and endeavor and continued to travel the world. So I understand about I understand about international business and finance and everything else. So coming from a conceptual standpoint to educational standpoint to a working standpoint to a boots on the ground standpoint, isolationism does not work. If something needs to be accomplished, if I, for example, take a group of people who have never before seen a machine and say, here, this is yours now. They have no clue what it is. They need to be shown how to use it. When someone knows how to use it, that knowledge then gets spread out and passed on. All right. So there is rampant corruption across the many nation states in Africa. There is the ethnic cleansing. There are all kinds of problems rampant upon the nation states of Africa. We can go on and on for days about the IMF, about NATO, the EU, the former colonial powers. Brit- British members of parliament are talking about Africa in open parliament sessions. That should tell you that their interest going forward. With all of that said, um, it should behoove one to understand what is needed on the ground. And something that I continuously hit resistance among a lot of American black people who, one, have never been there, two, have never traveled there, don't know any of the nation states, don't even speak any languages or have any actual in depth knowledge. All right? You
Hmm.
need someone on the ground locally. All right, now we're talking brass tacks. You need someone physically on the ground, local, an African who you can do business with to help you with the ins and outs of the people on the ground who you're going to be doing business with. You have to have resources to bribe people at the local level, at the government level, at the mid level. You need someone to be able to watch your business interests and endeavors. And the first thing you should be building is infrastructure because in as much as the AI and emerging tech is far ahead and above and beyond anything that American blacks are doing, the infrastructure is sorely lacking. And without that, none of the 54 sovereign nation states of Africa are going to be doing anything. All right. So the
Mm,
intellectual capital for international finance is sorely lacking. But before you even get to that point, all right, the physical infrastructure, roads, sewage, drainage, agriculture. The nation states can barely even feed themselves, right? They largely, to a large degree, if we're being honest, cannot feed themselves. Having resources without the ability to exploit them yourself for your usage, it makes them useless to you, makes them valuable to others.
to
So again,
others.
so again, if since you have resources that are of value to others because you do not have the ability to exploit them yourself, it should behoove you to learn from those who are using your resources, take that intellectual capital, and then use it yourself. All right, I cannot make that any plainer or any clearer than that.
Well, that's why we're having this discussion, right? This,
Earlier
tonight's
tonight, Mike was
tonight's
Mike had an article in there about power.
yeah, tonight's discussion is about black cultural intelligence. So that's the what you said about being able to communicate with people on the ground and actually get business done. That's all about a part of cultural intelligence, and that's what we've been discussing. Why we started having these hangouts, because that's the important piece that a lot of black people in America just don't seem to get. There's a sort of isolationist sort of mentality that's prevalent within black culture that says that we can just not communicate with the rest of the world in a globalized economy and still come out on top. That hasn't, I have yet to see anybody actually do this and win. So I'd be interested in seeing if anybody can point this out to me where this has been successful.
You know, exactly, 100%. 100, no, excuse me, 100%. All right.
Hmm.
So, we're talking about having contacts on, having contacts on the ground. Who are you going to be doing business with? If you do not have someone on the ground that you're doing business with, you're doing absolutely nothing. Are you going to stay in country? Are you going to move yourself and your family and all your resources there to watch your business venture? Because short of doing that, you're going to need someone on the ground to do business with. Furthermore, if you do plan on moving yourself and your family and your resources there, you're still going to need someone on the ground to negotiate the local customs and also deal with any corruption you have there, because that is a huge obstacle there.
Hmm.
Hey, Mike, I don't know if you mentioned this, but because I had kind of my phone kind of frizzed out here for a brief second. How much do you have to carry in a briefcase with regards to bribes typically?
It's 100,000 bare minimum. Anything less than 100,000, you're not going to get anywhere.
And you know what? I would say it's more than that, because that's only an initial upfront investment. As your business venture continues on over time, certain people are going to keep their hands out, as it is around the world. All right, so
Hmm.
that's not something that's unique to Africa. That's around the world. Right? That's part of the quote
Well, I
unquote
was only
big.
mentioning I'm only mentioning because Complex asked what's the minimum, right? So what's the minimum entry fee?
Right, right. Exactly.
Yeah, six
Exactly.
figures. Yeah, 100 grand.
Yeah, correct. And you have to be prepared for an ongoing for ongoing for ongoing payments. All right.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, Ghana Warrior in chat says 10% is expected on all contracts from officials.
there you go. Case in point.
Hmm.
Case in point. So until that can be gotten around, that is literally an insurmountable hurdle that needs to be met. That can be dealt with over time. Given human nature, it's probably never going to go away entirely. That which is another ugly truth that no one wants to hear about. But it says on this cultural intelligence flowchart strategy, how can I plan awareness, metacognition, planning, and checking? So if you have to be able to plan vertical integration. So what is it that you're planning to create? All right. If you want to build, again, if you want to build a school, all right, if you want to build a school, you know, you need to source your materials. You need the logistics of getting your materials to your job site. Do you have that experience and that capital in hand to make all of these things happen? And do you have the infrastructure to even move the materials in a timely and efficient manner? Depending on where it is you're going to build the school, no, you do not. Which brings us back to the infrastructure of roads. and irrigation and drainage, power, electricity. Okay, so if you have to, if you have to use and borrow the intellectual and technological capital of others to put yourself into a position where you can then turn around and now create your own, that's what everyone else does. So why should it be any different for any of the African nation states? Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to mindset, which is what this flow chart is titled cultural intelligence.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring this up so that we can actually touch on this before we close out in about 20 minutes. So basically, drive is how can I adapt, interests, uh, motivation, and confidence, right? So initially, you're going to need some form of understanding of how do you adapt to an environment that's outside of the ADOS environment itself. ADOS environments are very limited in their ability to adapt outside of apparel, right? I mean, guys wearing skinny jeans with little chains on their hips and stuff like that, and colorful braids and stuff. I don't consider that to be adaptable outside of the community itself, but nonetheless, that transitions over to knowledge. How is this similar to my other experiences? So, what other experiences have you had in doing business um, outside of the black community? How can you relate those experiences to your DE? Please mute yourself if you can. As I was saying, knowledge. How is it similar to my other experiences? How can you relate that to your how can you relate African growth and opportunity to your previous experiences? Um, and that leads down to strategy. How can I plan awareness? How can I plan? So your awareness and planning and checking. What, do you have any strategy at all to begin with? Is another question. So how can you plan if you don't have a strategy to begin with? I see this a lot in the manosphere. Just random hangouts talking about Aisha Curry and you know human traffickers on there and drug dealers and ex felons and convicts and things of that nature. Yeah, that's not a strategy. That is not a strategy at all. Having you know 800 people in the hangout, 1,000 people in the hangout. You know that's no longer anything that's applicable to a real strategy. That's just too much randomness. So you have to have um, the ability to plan, um, for your next venture or what you're trying to get yourself into, which is the action. How do I behave? Um, like a Dusty Beta Mel Coon. What is it that you're doing, right? Um, speech, speech acts, verbal, nonverbal behaviors, cues. Do you speak another language? Do you speak Spanish? Do you speak Portuguese? Do you speak German? Do you speak Dutch? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you
How can you
speak?
leverage?
Do you at least speak clear, coherent English? How about that? You if you think that you're going to sit down and do business and everything is son, bruh, you know what I mean? And I'm this and we gonna do this and we about to do that. All right, all of these things, you know. So you know,
Mhm.
and being see here's the thing, right? Emotional thinking has no room when it excuse me. Emotional thinking has no room when it comes to doing business. All right, and it has been my experience over a lifetime that a lot of people of every phenotype, but especially black people, lead with the emotions first and base their thinking behind emotions. Okay, what sounds good, what feels good, what sounds good, you know. So,
Mhm.
are you going to are you going to take a more logical approach, a less emotional approach? Is your mindset less emotional and more logical? All right. Is it based a little less? See, books in theory are great, but nothing beats hands-on experience.
Hmm.
Above all else, that trumps everything. And we won't all agree on everything. We won't all see things
Hmm.
the same way, but each of us brings our own unique experiences and mindsets to every situation, and all those things should be built upon. Because I personally am of the mindset, and you always heard me say that, you know, as a black person, you need to think your way through, because up to this point, it has not worked. Their strategy and narratives have not worked. The little baby steps and cookie crumbs over the decades, you know, it's not working because it's 50 years already, and we're still talking baby steps and crumbs. So clearly, it's not working. You have to think your way through.
Hmm. I just wanted to touch on this little flow chart again. We talked about this our first cultural intelligence event on here, which was last week. So the EQ aspect is the emotional intelligence. So focused on developing an understanding of an ability to manage emotions. Right, you can't just you can't fly off the handle on a hangout and try to cyber take someone's head off, decapitate them. Uh, can be enhanced through life. Uh, can be enhanced throughout life. Recently understood to be an important predictor of one's potential for success. Right. So your ability to handle yourself in dialogue where you agree to disagree and you can walk away. That's actually a bonus in terms of emotional intelligence. Fosters understanding and management of your own emotions. That goes into what I just said before. The ability to agree to disagree, knowing your temperament, promotes positive relationships, increases self motivation and drive. So that's a part of the self improvement that's been talked about on a couple of different platforms such as C Boogie Productions, this platform, Man of Tomorrow. Shout out to MOT. Um, so we're practicing all of these multiple intelligences on this platform, and you see this on MOT, you see this on C Boogie Productions, shout out to C Boogie, as well as um, what's this other brother's name? My mind just went blank.
Angry man.
No, 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 no.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
The truth is, I know it. The truth is, I know it
Scratch that
as
from the
well.
record. Scratch that from the record. Sorry, Mike. Chat, forgive me. Forgive me. Scratch that from the record.
Yeah. Um, and then IQ, right? IQ is something that we all know, focused on developing cognitive abilities, more academically oriented, right? So that the proverbially pronounced educated lame. That's where that comes from, right? Always focusing on developing cognitive abilities, more academically oriented. Generally thought to be established at birth, has been traditionally used to predict potential for one's success, right? That's what IQ is a measurement of. Allows development of needed knowledge base. So you need a strong demographic of human capital to get anything off the ground. So enables development of technical skills and abilities, and enables conceptual thinking. I would say that's things that have to be cultivated as well. So you can cultivate that with an IQ. uh, and that's what we do on this channel, right? So we do that on this platform.
Hey,
Conceptual
hey,
thinking,
um, what do you?
intellectual, innovative, innovative ideas come out of complex conversations, right? So that's what we try to have on here. So we're pushing that. We're pushing all of these multiple intelligences on this platform. Go ahead, Paul Bryant.
Um, I was gonna say, the IQ part, I think I'm sorry, dovetails with cultural intelligence, because uh, other other cultures seem to promote education, science, technology, education, mathematics, also called STEM, business success, all right, things that traditionally are not celebrated in American Black culture. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, so it's all about who has the flashiest car, who has the best game, the most swag. None of none of these things are going to increase your where you are in life. All right, and nothing is going to accomplish any of these goals. All right, as far as business and any type of African development or any type of business. All right, so sports are great, music is great, but outside of rap music and flashy cars and dancing and music, where is what's being developed, all right, from a cultural standpoint amongst American Black people. All right, so I'm of the mindset that that needs to change. There needs to be more of a focus on the IQ aspect and the CQ and the EQ. Everything goes excuse me, everything goes hand in hand. All right, it's consistently covered here in the Black Brain Trust how space and emerging technologies. All right, that is the future. So if you're still worrying about Cardi B and Aisha Curry and who's select and who's non-select, when these emerging technologies, come down the pipe, where are you going to be? You're going to be at the bottom of the food chain. All right. When we start to see hyperloops being built out, when we start to see um, mining operations on asteroids around our solar system. And this is all real world tech that's covered here on the Black Brain Trust, being done right now. When these things are happening on a daily basis and you're still worrying about the sheer and utter nonsense, you have no one to blame but yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Complex design. DE. You have anything you want to add to this multiple intelligences?
No, I can't add anything to it. It's quite extensive. Whoever did this put a lot of work into it, a lot of knowledge, and anybody who really wants to become involved. I mean, whether it be building something or just creating something in general, just follow the flow chart. Serious. It will teach you how to go about building your life or building a business.
Mm-hmm. Complex design. You have any closing thoughts on this?
Well, no, this is I don't because we touched on the last cultural intelligence discussion. We went into these flow charts at length. So I just I pretty much back all that was said with regards to not only just um, learning like adapting, you know, the acquisition of multiple intelligences, but also being able to utilize it like in a holarchic type of thinking. So it's like when you think with all intelligences. You don't use one or the other, or you're largely proficient here but deficient over here. It's like you actually incorporate all three, and what that does is it actually gives you a different way of it's I don't know, really, I'm not trying to get too abstract or quantum with it, but it does basically just makes your thoughts more whole about whatever it is that you're looking to undertake, or anything that you're looking to do. It just makes your thoughts more whole. I guess that's the best way I can put it. So we'll just continue to push on and hammer this into your dome pieces, because there's a lot of other dudes in the 2.0 land that are pushing a whole lot of, like, high fatty foods, man, into your minds. So
You you
I'm trying.
said
I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be nice, dude. I'm trying to be nice.
I know. You said something that was awesome. Something that I say all the time. You have to elevate your thinking. All right. When you elevate your thinking, you can literally bend the world around you to shape and create your own reality. But you have to be able to elevate your thinking. All right. So as you look toward the lower end of the socioeconomic strata, all right, people are concerned about base needs, food, shelter, all right, basic existence. As you tend to go higher up the socioeconomic strata, where the base needs are all met and are not a concern, the conversations tend to change. So one can always tell, all right, a person's perspective and a mindset and where they came from along the socioeconomic strata. All right, it is evident in a person's conversation and in a person's topics. So to dovetail, it's funny. Now we're going to come back to the EQ and the CQ, taking the the leadership roles. Right?
Mhm.
Um, if black people were to hit the IQ, elevate their thinking, and take a more intellectual standpoint towards things, they would begin to elevate their thinking and elevate their circumstances. Then the EQ and the CQ will also rise as well. Okay, so
Mhm.
Denise, which comes back to what I said, you have to think your way through. All is mental because mental is supreme, and everything works with everything else. So not really too many ways I can kind of reword that and restate it. So with that,
Mhm.
I'm finished.
Yeah, a person's capability for successful adaptation to new cultural and unfamiliar settings. This is very important for African Americans, right? So a lot of ADOS people who want to hashtag their way through life. Um, your capability for successful adaptation to new cultural and familiar settings, you're gonna have to be able to get out of your bodegas and your stoops that you sit on in your urban environments, and be able to interact in unfamiliar settings. So that doesn't have to be in Africa. It could just be in the suburbs, um, or it could be in Long Island for that matter. I know Long Island wants to be its own little state or city or whatever it is, separate from New York, but that's never going to happen.
That's never gonna happen.
Yeah. Focus on developing cross-cultural agility. Um, we have several members from different places. Scholar Chang, who's our resident Southeast Asia subject matter expert, SME. He integrates well into the Black Brain Trust, even though he himself is not African, right? So um, it, I have to mute you, complex. There's a lot of feedback coming from you. Scholar Chang, who is Asian, actually integrates well into the Brain Trust and doesn't try to be us, and we don't try to be him, but his ability to interact with us and be interoperable in terms of knowledge and culture actually has been a strong part of his cultural intelligence as well. So you see this happen in real time on this platform, not like other platforms in the manosphere. So uh, more social awareness, three key parts: cultural strategic thinking, what you think and how you solve problems. Um, I don't see many problems in the manosphere being solved. Talking about Aisha Curry um, or R. Kelly or whatever it is, the flavor of the week. But that's important. So that's a part of cultural strategic thinking. Motivation, energize, and persistent actions. There's a lot of there's a lot of energy around redundant topics and persistent actions, but none of it leads to anything of benefit. Behavior, uh, adaptive actions, and behaviors. So that all falls into that.
Yeah, right.
Uh,
Exactly.
yep. Um, sustain relationships and social group acceptance. Um, the brain trust actually operates this way. So we have sustained relationships and social group acceptance. Uh, allows for development of in-group knowledge and acceptance. Enables development of declarative knowledge or knowledge about the state of things. Exactly what we do on here, the knowledge of state of things every week, space and technology, geopolitics, economics, cryptocurrencies, and deep dives on Saturday deep dives. Uh,
You know,
oh, and let me just finish the last piece. Valued as strategic competitive advantage for building um, mutual mutual beneficial relationships. So again, we have resident scholars from, such as Scholar Chang and uh, a few other members who come from Europe as well, who listen to the Hangouts on the replay because they're, it's too late for them to be on the live stream. But a couple of Europeans who have emailed me after these Hangouts and said how great they love the Hangouts. So they wish they could partake in them. So those are mutual beneficial relationships where they're interested in getting down. They hear some of the discussions about infrastructure as an investment, and they are 100% on board. Go ahead, Bob. Right.
yeah, I was just about to echo what you just said. Strategic relationships and alliances. That's what business is all about. That literally is what business is all about. Strategic alliances and partnerships. Without that, you have nothing. All right. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's really not much more that needs to be really not much more that needs to be said about that. Coming back to the cultural piece, I understand. You know, I understand the militant mindset, but it's unrealistic
Mm-hmm.
and it does not work. And the reality is, no developed nation on this planet is isolationist. Even for those that were, they are not any longer. It does not
Mm-hmm.
work. It has not worked, and it will not work going forward. So to think so, with respect, is highly, highly misinformed.
How many hours did it take you to learn how to speak German?
Um,
Four
I,
thousand.
I don't know the amount of hours. What I did was I started watching videos on YouTube. I started watching German Pod 101, and I started with Duo, and I took the German module, and then I took an actual class. Class was it's called Fluent City. There you can go to their website, fluentcity.com, and class is 2 hours once a week for 10 weeks straight. very great class. You learn to speak your language from the very first night. Okay, so from my time going back and forth to Germany and visiting, knowing a few words and a
Mhm.
few phrases here and there, that was great. Watching the videos was great. But for me, for the way I learned, sitting in that classroom one on one, it was great because you have a book, but it's not textbook based, it's experiential based, and the instructor talks to you and you learn. And it's very interactive, and you get little bit of homework. So I completed that first 10-week course. Then I took a second one, and what I did was I took the mindset of total immersion. I would watch German news. I would watch German
Mhm.
sitcoms. I bought a German children's book, which sounds crazy, but children learn to speak a language the same way you do. So reading a
Mhm.
children's book for someone who's learning, that was a great resource. So again, I immersed myself as much as I could. And
Mhm.
so took me about, I want to say, 4 months, maybe five, before I felt comfortable to actually start speaking to someone German. So when I went to
Mhm.
my next trip, I felt better and I was stronger. So when I was there, I just only watched everything on uh, the news and sitcoms, and next thing I knew, I was just fluent.
Mhm. I mean, I learned how to at least made my attempts on speaking German by reading my Volkswagen Audi manual. Work trying to remove my water pump. Achung. Be careful. Be careful. Achung.
Yeah. Well,
It is funny
Achtung,
though.
Achtung,
Yeah,
yes,
Achtung.
Achtung, yes, yes.
Hey, what did
The Volks.
Fahrvergnügen mean?
Um, it's kind of
Pleasure of driving? Is that what that meant?
it's kind of an experiential thing. Feels good, feels right. You know,
Mhm.
it doesn't really mean one thing. It's kind of like it describes an experience in the joy and pleasure of driving, basically.
Mhm.
But Germans, Germans are very logical people, so they don't actually create new words. They combine words to make one word,
Mhm.
and it's accepted. Like, okay, fine. Like for example, you guys, as fellow racers, Porsche invented the double clutch. So the PDK, Porsche Doppelkupplungsgetriebe, um, Doppel is double, Kupplung, which is coupling, is clutch, and
Mhm.
Getriebe, so it's Porsche um, transmission. So it's Doppelkupplungsgetriebe, double clutch transmission. So you just add on the Porsche and it's PDK. So they're three separate words, but they combine them. So now that's one word, and that's how Germans are. Which to my meticulous nature, it appeals to me because they're logical about everything.
Mhm.
Yeah, that would actually probably make it easier to learn. I should check that out, man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and also German has German has no grammar rules. The only grammar rules are there are no silent letters in the German language. You pronounce every single letter. That's why when Germans talk, they sound like they're talking like robots because they're pronouncing every single letter. And the only exception is the letter H. If the letter H is at the beginning or the end, you pronounce it. If the letter H is in the middle of a word, you don't pronounce it. So those are the only two grammar rules in German. I mean, there are others, but as far as the sounds, then we'll come down to the spelling. But
Mhm.
it's really simple. Although they say it's the hardest languages to learn are the Slavic languages and the Asian languages, then The first language below that, they say, is German. But for me, I found it to be very easy to learn. Most people find it to be a very hard and harsh language. I love it. And of course, I also love German culture. I've been going there for years, So I relocated, I moved, I raced in the ring. So, but, but again, being of different culture,
Lucky.
being, having experienced different cultures, my mom, you know, she took me around the world from a youth. So I was exposed to different cultures. Okay, so whether it was, British culture, or French culture, or German culture, I was exposed to it. So from a young age, I was not stuck in any one box.
Hmm.
So whereas, you know, so instead of watching Aretha Franklin, I was watching Leontine Price. How many black people even know who Leontine Price is? So things like that, and she's black. So
All right. With that being said, thank you all for joining us. And we'll be back tomorrow for geopolitics. Make sure you follow up on that. Hit the like button if you have not already. Uh, Share the video if possible, and share the docket if possible as well. Also, don't forget that Pan African Weekend event is happening July 18th to the 21st in New York City. Make sure you get your tickets now, um, and try to network there as well. So